How's it going, YouTube? Today I'd like to make a video, a short but detailed video about rockers and cab corners on your 99 to 07 Chevy and GMC trucks. It's the same process for the standard cab, extended cab, crew cab. The only difference is the crew cab is a little bit more work just because of that center pillar, but it's basically all the same thing. I'm going to go over some of the special tools that I'd recommend buying, but you don't necessarily need them. It'll just make the job a lot easier. I see a lot of trucks for sale on Facebook Marketplace that use it's got new rockers and cab corners on it, but indefinitely some people cut them out and they put these cheap slip-ons on there, and they'll last for maybe a couple months, then they start to sag. The rust starts to pop through again and it starts to look like crap. So I'm going to show the proper way to do it. This will get you another 20 plus years, depending on how much you take care of it, depending on if you do your pour or your fluid film, all your what's it called, all the seam spray and whatnot. So some of the tools that I recommend purchasing if you do not have, obviously many people have like an angle grinder. I'd also buy some cutting wheels, some 40 and 80 grit disc sandpaper, and then that should be all for that. But a belt sander, a little belt sander, these are actually incredibly useful. I'll show you later on in the video, but this little tip right here, this will get you in some tight spots to sand down your welds. Wire brush, just to brush off your welds, and then get some of the slack off of it. And then we got some vice grip clamps. This will hold your seams together on your new panels. It'll hold some of your other body parts together. And then we got a panel splitter, or whatever you want to call it. But as you can see, it's got a sharp edge here, so you can rip through your panels after you drilled your spot welds out. A center punch for drilling your spot welds, and then for drilling holes for your new panels, spot weld driller or bit. It's got an idler here that's spring loaded, so it'll basically pop in to your center punch after you have made it, and then it'll kind of idle there and you drill out your spot welds. And then some body hammers. Body hammers along with a panel clamp that has a copper backing, and then it's got a notch here so you can weld your new spot welds as the panel is being clamped together. Another thing I suggest getting is a weld through primer, either a copper based or zinc based. The reason for this is because when you chop your old rockers off, you pull the seams apart, you want to grind the metal clean so that you have a nice clean welding surface. But if you keep the metal bare, it's going to start to rust between your seams, and when it rusts between your seams, your panels are going to start to separate and get fat, and that's where your rust is going to start again. So as you can see, I just kind of have the doors sitting on here just for alignment here, but they're pretty much cut. There's a little bit of a gap here, but I'm going to end up putting a plate on the other side there just so I have something to weld to. But I have all the holes dimpled, ready to be drilled. And then the inside here, I still have to pull the inner out and then drill all those as well. As you can see, I already have the doors pulled off of this side. I'm going to go ahead and go over this with a red Scotch-Brite pad just to get all the surface rust and whatnot off of it. And then rockers are already cut. They're already drilled. They're actually right here. So I got the bottoms drilled for the inner. I got the tops drilled here. And I also have same issue as the other side. There's a little bit of a gap, so I got a tab welded on the inside there. And I have a tab welded on the inside here. So I'm just going to sand those down to bare metal So I have something to weld to. So as you can see, I have the doors on it, at least just the back ones. This is just for panel alignment, making sure the gaps are good. But the rockers and cab corners that I would suggest buying are the ones off of Raybuck. You can find them on the internet. They offer the full rocker, the full inner rocker, and the full cab corner. And the reason I say this is because they also offer the slip-ons. You do not want to purchase the slip-ons. You want to get the actual rockers that you can drill out and weld to this inner seam here. Now Raybuck is a pretty sweet site actually, because they have floor pans and they got bedsides and all sorts of stuff for these trucks. They have like the lower bedside, they have the arches, which I don't recommend buying the arches, just the arches. I recommend just doing a full bedside. But if you're in a pinch for money and you have the time and the knowledge to do it, you could do it. I'm not going to say they're going to hold up as long as a bedside, but beside the fact, they have lots of different body panel choices for these trucks. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the old rockers and cab corners that I chopped out of that truck. So here are the old rockers that I pulled out of this truck. As you can see, they're pretty rusty. There's more rust on the inside than there is on the outside. Usually the surface area that you can see on the outside is smaller than what's on the inside. So I cut all 3 layers out. Now I say 3 because there is an inner layer that is between the inner rocker and the outer rocker. That layer does not need to be replaced. Just chop it out, throw it away. So as you can see, all of these are spot welds. These all need to be drilled out. So the process in which you replace your rockers and your cab corners is, first you want to remove your interior. You got to pull your door seams or your seals, pull your seats, pull your carpet. You don't have to pull your headliner. It might get a little dirty. You might have some type of welding sparks hit it. In my case, I'm replacing the headliner anyway, but if you're really that meticulous and you don't want anything to happen to it, I would pull the headliner as well. You're going to want to disconnect your doors. You can pull your doors off. I have the extended cab door on here just temporarily, just because I was checking body lines. But basically, you're going to start off by drilling out every one of these spot welds. So every one of these spot welds, you want to take your center punch, pop the center of it, take your spot weld driller or your bit, and drill every single one of these out. Then after that, you want to mark a line to chop your old rockers from this part of your cab, same as the rear part. And then if you have a crew cab, you want to chop it right at the center here where you have that other pillar. So when you're cutting right here in the middle and in the back, you do not want to chop just the cab. So these rockers, when they're full, like before they're cut, they will come up to about here. You want to make cuts on both your new rocker and your old rocker. So the reason for this is if you cut this too short, then you still have room here. And if you cut this too short, then you still have room here. So one misconception that some people have about these rockers are that you're going to get them, you're going to chop your old ones off, and these are going to fit right up perfectly. That is not true. You may get a gap here, you may get a gap here. They won't line up super perfectly in the back here. You might get a gap here. As you can see, there is a lot of welding done right here. And the reason for that is I had to weld a tab to the back of this rocker so that it would underlap the cab here. And so I had some more welding surfaces to fill up the gap. Now, filling in gap is not bad. The problem is where you leave holes. Because when you get to the filling stage, you don't want any holes in your welds where moisture can come in from the backside and disrupt your filler. So like I was saying, this truck got the outers and the inners. So the inners are fairly straightforward. They're actually easier than the outers because there's not as much cutting. As you can see, a little bit of gold here and gold here. That is where I sprayed that copper weld primer, the weld through primer. And you can see in some spots I laid little beads, and the reason for that is because some of these spot welds didn't want to hold. So you can do a little bead of welds here, but you want to be careful. You don't want to lay too many. Well, I mean, you can lay as many as you want. This is just kind of my preference. But so when I sprayed that primer, this bottom rocker here, or this inner rocker, the bottom face, I grinded it down smooth. I got all the paint off of it, and I sprayed that. You got this inner lip up here. This is the lip that your inner rocker is welded to. This is not the same lip that your outer rocker is welded to. So this you want to grind flat, and you want to make sure that it's straight. So the way you do that is you can get a square piece of tubing or a piece of wood. You lay it up against like this side of that seam, so it would be up in here, and you take a body hammer and you hit it flat. So you want it straight and you want it flat. And then up here in between this seam, you can see, so this inner seam here, this is the body and this is the new rocker. So between that seam, that is where I sprayed that weldable primer. This is after I cleaned it all up, made sure it was flat, took a piece of wood on this side or on this side, depending on where I was, and then took a body hammer and hit it to make sure that it was flat and straight. So coming over to the cab corner, this was one of the bigger pain in the butt pieces of the job. And the reason for that is 9 out of 10 times, you're never gonna get this cut as a butt weld. So what you wanna do, when you get these rockers, they're full rockers. So the new rockers will be about up to here. You never wanna cut it up to here. You either wanna start down here and work your way up, or whatever you wanna do. But wherever your rocker rust is, or your cab corner rust, chop the rust out, and then start with fresh metal, either, you know, down here, up here, but never up here. So as you can see, these cab corners are not butt welded. What I actually did was I cut this piece close, and then I used the spare metal that I had from the rest of the cab corner, and I cut a little sliver about this wide and tacked it, or more so welded it to the inside of the cab corner going around. And then I was able to slip it up inside here, and then I could keep tacking it to this pre-existing cab corner here. Now, rule of thumb is you don't want more than 1/4 inch of filler. As you can see, that is not more than 1/4 inch of filler, but you don't want any welds protruding out of your filler. So there's still a little bit of a valley here for you to fill, and then you'd be able to sand it flat. So one of the more crucial factors of this job is making sure that your body lines are all gapped within spec. And within spec, I mean, use your eye. Like, that is the most useful tool of this job. Use your eye and your hand. As you can see, if you run your hand across here, you can feel that this isn't protruding too much. It's actually not protruding at all. The door should be protruding more than the cab corner itself. Let me shut the door real quick. But you want the door to protrude just a little bit more than the cab corner. And the reason for that is for when you have rock chips or bugs, they'll slide the door and they'll miss the cab corner, and they won't chip this corner here of your cab corner. But as you can see, you're never gonna have a perfect seam. So like here is, it looks thinner here. This is the factory cab, this is how I got it. It's thinner here, it's fatter here. So use your eye to kind of split the difference. You kind of want it to match down here, but if it's just a little bit fatter down here, it's It's not gonna make a big difference. And as you can see, the door is not even too straight. So it's got that little lip right there. And one thing you wanna be very mindful of is the foam that's on the inside of the cab corner. I'm sure you already noticed it, but this was not intentional. This is from fire. So the foam inside actually caught fire while I was welding. Sometimes it's inevitable, and sometimes you can avoid it. It kind of just, if it happens, it happens. Just have a hose next to you, and you can either spray it in from the back side here. And this is also why it's important to pull your interior up, because you can spray it in through the back side here. And there's this hole right down here. This doesn't do anything, but that hole past that, as you can see, that actually gets into where the foam is, so you'll be able to put out a fire or anything if that happens. But same thing with this side. As you can see, there's quite a bit of weld here. The reason for that is because there is a gap. So you basically cut a piece of your panel. So what you already cut off of your rocker, so whatever this excess was that you cut out, you cut a piece off of there, you weld it to the inside of here, and then you can shove it underneath this pre-existing rocker, and you'll have fresh metal to weld to for this rocker and that rocker. And you can basically fill it in when you're done. Now you might be able to tell that these welds aren't super spectacular, and this is where that belt sander comes in. So tight areas like here, tight areas like here where the door seams got to, or door seal has to lap over, tight areas like here, back here for the cab corner, all that is very easily able to be sanded down with that belt sander. So back to the welds though. So as you can see, these welds are not perfect. And the reason for that is they don't need to be perfect. They just have to be filled in completely. You don't want any holes, so that moisture can come in from the backside for your filler. All this stuff is gonna be filled over. So basically all the filler is gonna go overlap of this, and it'll all be sanded down flat. These rockers on this truck were replaced. Not the inners or the cab corners, just the outside rockers. And as you can see, that is about as factory as it gets with an aftermarket rocker. You cannot feel a single spot where they lap each other. And now these welds were not perfect. These were the same as those on that truck over there. But it's the filler that was able to overlap those welds onto the new panel. So before I end this video, I want to go over one thing that I think is kind of key to this. When I was cutting these new rockers to fit where the old rockers were, back seemed to be just a little bit lower than the front. So the door gap between the door and the rocker on the back were a little bit fatter than the front. And this is kind of where those self-tappers come into play. So you want to use those self-tappers to mount the new rocker, but just to hold it in place. And you want to continuously put your doors on and take your doors off until you get that even gap between the front and the rear. That way, when you're looking at it, when it's all said and done, it's going to look really goofy if you got a small gap up front and a huge gap in the back. So you want to make sure that that gap is even all the way through. So that's about it for this video. I'm going to come back to that cab inside that paint booth there and do the fiberglass and then a couple more things of filler. And I'll go ahead and go over that in another video. But this is just the metal work. This stuff, this is the most important part pretty much, because this you really can't go back. You can grind any of the filler out or chip it out or whatever you want to call it, but you do not want to keep welding and cutting and welding and cutting and welding and cutting. So that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one.